Evening, Hugo. Today is the 11th of March 2023. We've had huge snowfall in England in the last few days, so it's probably been about 20 centimetres. So it's been, quite a lot. Probably the most I've ever seen in Sheffield, if I'm honest. So been out with Daisy and things, and thinking about when we used to go sledding and play snowball fights, and also when we did it in Japan. And hoping that we get to play again in the snow sometime soon. Um, Tried to phone you again this morning, but the same problem as before. You're not able to come to the phone every week as you were before, which is sad. I keep fighting for you. I messaged the car, but I've not heard anything back. I really feel for you because it's not your fault in any of this situation, and you're the one that is is unfortunate in this sense. But I love you, and I'll always support you, and I'll never give up fighting for you. Um, so yeah. So what's the score today? We're doing some more Matilda. We're on to page 204, and we're not far from the finish now. So I'll keep reading, and then hopefully we'll get to the end today. So page 204 is called The Practice. Matilda found the house empty as usual. So there's the picture. Her father was not yet back from work, her mother was not yet back from bingo, and her brother might be anywhere. She went straight into the living room and opened the drawer of the sideboard where she knew her father kept a box of cigars. She took one out and carried it up to her bedroom and shut herself in. Now for the practice, she told herself. It's going to be tough, but I'm determined to do it. Her plan for helping Miss Honey was beginning to form beautifully in her mind. She had it now in almost every detail, but in the end it all depended upon her being able to do one very special thing with her eye power. She knew she wouldn't manage it right away, but she felt fairly confident that there was a great deal of practice and effort, she would succeed in the end. The cigar was essential. It was perhaps a bit thicker than she would have liked, but the weight was about right. It would be fine for practicing with. There was a small dressing table in Matilda's bedroom with her hairbrush and a comb on it and 2 library books. She cleared these things to one side and laid the cigar down in the middle of the dressing table. Then she walked away and sat on the end of her bed. She was now about 10 feet from the cigar. She settled herself and began to concentrate, and very quickly this time she felt the electricity beginning to flow inside her head, gathering itself behind the eyes, and the eyes became hot, and millions of tiny invisible hands began pushing out like sparks towards the cigar. Move, she whispered, and to her intense surprise, almost at once the cigar, with its little red and gold paper band around its middle, rolled away across the top of the dressing table and fell onto the carpet. Matilda had enjoyed that. It was lovely doing it. It had felt as though the sparks were going round and round inside her head and flashing out of her eyes. It had given her a sense of power that was almost ethereal, and how quick it had been this time, how simple. She crossed the bed and picked up the cigar and put it back on the table. Now for the difficult one, she thought. But if I have the power to push, then surely I have the power to lift. It is vital I learn how to lift it. I must learn how to lift it as right up into the air and keep it there. It's not a very heavy thing, a cigar. She sat on the end of her bed and started again. It was easy now to summon up the power behind her eyes. It was like pushing a trigger in the brain. Lift, she whispered. Lift, lift. At first, the cigar started to roll away, but then, with Matilda concentrating fiercely, one end of it slowly lifted up about an inch off the tabletop. With a colossal effort, she managed to hold it there for about 10 seconds, then it fell back again. Phew, she gasped. I'm getting it. I'm starting to do it. For the next hour, Matilda kept practicing, and in the end, she had managed by the sheer power of her eyes to lift the whole cigar off the table about 6 inches into the air and hold it there about a minute. Then, suddenly, she was so exhausted she fell back on the bed and went to sleep. Easy. That was how her mother found her later in the evening. "What's the matter with you?" the mother said, waking her up. "Are you ill?" "Oh, gosh," Matilda said, sitting up and looking around. "No, I'm all right. I was a bit tired, that's all." From then on, every day after school, Matilda shut herself in her room and practiced with a cigar, and soon it all began to come together in the most wonderful way. 6 days later, by the following Wednesday evening, she was able not only to lift the cigar up into the air, but also to move it around exactly as she wished. It was beautiful. "I can do it," she cried. "I can really do it. I can pick the cigar up just with my eye power and push it and pull it in the air any way I want." All she had to do now was to put her great plan into action. And this chapter is called Third Miracle. The next day was Thursday, and that, as the whole of Miss Honey's class knew, was the day on which the headmistress would take charge of the first lesson after lunch. In the morning, Miss Honey said to them, "One or two of you did not particularly enjoy the last occasion when the headmistress took the class, so let us all try to be especially careful and clever today. How are your ears, Eric, after your last encounter with Miss Trunchbull?" "She stretched them," Eric said. "My mother said she's positive they are bigger than they were." "And Rupert," Miss Honey said, "I'm glad to see you didn't lose any of your hair after last Thursday." "My head was jolly sore afterwards," Rupert said. "And you, Nigel," Miss Honey said, do please try not to be smart Alec with the headmistress today. You were really quite cheeky to her last week." "I hate her," Nigel said. "Try not to make it obvious," Miss Honey said. "It doesn't pay. She's a very strong woman. She has muscles like steel ropes." "I wish I was grown up," Nigel said. "I'd knock her flat." "I doubt you would," Miss Honey said. "No one has ever got the better of her yet." What What will she be testing us on this afternoon?" a small girl asked. "Almost certainly the 3 times table," Miss Honey said. "That's what you are all meant to have learnt this past week. Make sure you know it." Lunch came and went. After lunch the class reassembled. Miss Honey stood at one side of the room. They all sat silent, apprehensive, waiting. And then, like some giant of doom, the enormous Trunchbull strode into the room in her green breeches and cotton smock. She went straight to her jug of water and lifted it up by the handle and peered inside. "I am glad to see," she said, "there are no slimy creatures in my drinking water this time. If there had been, then something exceptionally unpleasant would have happened to every single member of this class, and that includes you, Miss Honey." The class remained silent and very tense. They had learned a bit about this tigress by now, and nobody was about to take any chances. "Very well," boomed the Trunchbull. "Let us see how well you know your 3 times table. Or, to put it another way, let us see how badly Miss Honey has taught you the 3 times table. The Trunchbull was standing in front of the class, legs apart, hands on hips, scowling at Miss Honey, who stood silent at one side. Matilda, sitting motionless on her desk in the second row, was watching things very closely. "You!" the Trunchbull shouted, pointing the finger. The size of a rolling pin at a boy called Wilfrid. Wilfrid was on the extreme right of the front row. "Stand up, you!" she shouted at him. Wilfrid stood up. "Recite the 3 times table backwards," the Trunchbull barked. "Backwards," Wilfrid stammered, "but I haven't learned it backwards." "There you are," cried the Trunchbull, triumphant. "She's taught you nothing. Miss Honey, why have you taught them absolutely nothing at all in the last week?" "That is not true, headmistress," Miss Honey said. "They have all learnt their 3 times table, but I see no point in teaching it to them backwards. There is little point in teaching anything backwards. The whole object of life, headmistress, is to go forwards. I venture to ask whether even you, for example, can spell a simple word like wrong backwards straight away. I very much doubt it." "Don't you get impertinent with me, Miss Honey," the Trunchbull snapped. Then she turned back to the unfortunate Wilfrid. "Very well, boy," she said. "Answer me this. I have 7 apples, 7 oranges, and 7 bananas. How many pieces of fruit do I have altogether?" "Hurry up, get on with it. Give me the answer." "That's adding up," Wilfrid cried. "That wasn't the 3 times table, you blithering idiot," shouted the Trunchbull. "You festering gumboil, you flea-bitten fungus. That is the 3 times table. You have 3 separate lots of fruit, and each lot has 7 pieces." Three sevens are 21. Can't you see that, you stagnant cesspool? I'll give you one more chance. I have 8 coconuts, 8 monkey nuts, and 8 nutty little idiots like you. How many nuts do I have altogether? Answer me quickly. Poor Wilfred was properly flustered. Wait, he cried. Wait, please wait. I've got to add up 8 coconuts. 8. He started counting on his fingers. You bursting blister, yelled the Trunchbull. You moth-eaten maggot. This is not adding up. This is a multiplication. The answer is 3 eights, or is it 8 threes? What is the difference between 3 eights and 8 threes? Tell me that, you mangled little wurzel, and look sharp about it. By now, Wilfred was far too frightened and bewildered even to speak. In 2 strides, the Trunchbull was beside him, and by some amazing gymnastic trick, it may have been judo or karate, she flipped the back of Wilfred's legs with one of her feet so that the boy shot up on the ground and turned a somersault in the air. But halfway through the somersault, she caught him by an ankle and held him dangling upside down like a plucked chicken in a shop window. 8 threes, the Chancellor shouted, swinging Wilfred from side to side by his ankle. 8 threes is the same as 3 eights, and 3 eights are 24. Repeat that. At exactly that moment, Nigel, at the other end of the room, jumped to his feet and started pointing excitedly at the blackboard and screaming, "The chalk! The chalk! Look at the chalk! It's moving all on its own!" So hysterical and shrill was Nigel's scream that everyone in the place, including the Trunchbull, looked up at the blackboard, and there, sure enough, a brand new piece of chalk was hovering near the grey-black writing surface of the blackboard. "It's writing something," screamed Nigel. "The chalk is writing something," and indeed it was. "What the blazes is this?" yelled the Trunchbull. It had shaken her to see her own first name being written like that by an invisible hand. She dropped Wilfred onto the floor. Then she yelled at nobody in particular. "Who's doing this? Who's writing it?" The chalk continued to write, "Agatha, this is Magnus. This is Magnus." Everyone in the place heard the gasp that came from the Trunchbull's throat. "No," she cried, "it can't be. It can't be Magnus." "It is Magnus, and you'd better believe it." Miss Honey at the side of the room glanced swiftly at Matilda. The child was sitting very straight at her desk, the head held high, the mouth compressed, the eyes glittering like 2 stars. "Agatha, give my Jenny back her house." For some reason, everyone looked at the Trunchbull. The woman's face had turned white as snow, and her mouth was opening and shutting like a halibut out of water, and giving out a series of strangled gasps. Give my Jenny her wages. Give my Jenny the house. Then get out of here. If you don't, I will come and get you. I will come and get you like you got me. I am watching you, Agatha." The chalk stopped writing. It hovered for a few moments, then suddenly it dropped to the floor with a tinkle and broke in 2. Wilfred, who had managed to resume his seat in the first row, screamed, "Miss Trunchbull has fallen down. Miss Trunchbull is on the floor." This was the most sensational bit of news the most sensational bit of news of all, and the entire class jumped out of their seats to have a really good look. And there she was, the huge figure of the headmistress, stretched full length on her back across the floor, out for the count. Oh dear, look at that. Miss Honey ran forward and knelt beside the prostrate giant. "She fainted," she cried. "She's out cold. Someone go and fetch the matron at once." 3 children ran out of the room. Nigel, always ready for action, leapt up and seized the big jug of water. "My father says cold water is the best way to wake up someone who's fainted," he said, and with that he tipped the entire contents of the jug over the Trunchbull's head. No one, not even Miss Honey, protested. As for Matilda, she continued to sit motionless at her desk. She was feeling curiously elated. She felt as though she had touched something that was not quite of this world, the highest point of the heavens, the farthest star. She had felt most wonderfully the power surging up behind her eyes, gushing like a warm liquid inside her skull, and her eyes had become scorching hot, hotter than ever before, and things had come bursting out of her eye sockets. And then the piece of chalk had lifted up and began to write it. It seemed as though she had hardly done anything. It had all been so simple. The school matron, followed by 5 teachers, 3 women and 2 men, came rushing into the room. "By golly, somebody's floored her at last," cried one of the men, grinning. "Congratulations, Miss Honey." "Who threw the water over?" asked the matrons. "I did," said Nigel proudly. "Good for you," another teacher said. "Shall we get some more?" "Stop that," the matron said. "We must carry her up to the sick room." It took all 5 teachers and the matron to lift the enormous woman and stagger her out of the room. Miss Honey said to the class, "I think you'd all better go out to the playground and amuse yourself until the next lesson." Then she turned and walked over to the blackboard and carefully wiped out the chalk writing. The children began filing out of the classroom. Matilda started to go with them, but as she passed Miss Honey, she paused and her twinkling eyes met the teacher's eyes, and Miss Honey ran forward and gave the tiny child a great big hug and a kiss. A new house. Later that day, the news began to spread that the headmistress had recovered from her fainting fit and had then marched out of the school building, tight-lipped and white in the face. The next morning, she did not turn up at school. At lunchtime, Mr. Trilby, the deputy head, telephoned her house to inquire if she was feeling unwell. There was no answer to the phone. When the school was over, Mr. Trilby decided to investigate further. So he walked to the house where Miss Trunchbull lived on the edge of the village, the lovely, small, red brick Georgian building known as the Red House, tucked away in the woods behind the hills. He rang the bell, no answer. He knocked loudly, no answer. He called out, "Is anybody at home?" No answer. He tried the door, and to his surprise, it unlocked. He went in. The house was silent, and there was no one in it, and yet all the furniture was still in place. Mr. Trilby went upstairs to the main bedroom. Here also everything seemed to be normal until he started opening drawers and looking into cupboards. There were no clothes or underclothes or shoes anywhere. They had all gone. "She's done a bunk," Mr. Trilby said to himself, and he went away to inform the school governors that the headmistress had apparently vanished. On the second morning, Miss Honey received by registered post a letter from the firm of the local solicitors informing her that the last will and testament of her late father, Dr. Honey, had suddenly and mysteriously turned up. This document revealed that ever since her father's death, Miss Honey had in fact been the rightful owner of the property on the edge of the village known as the Red House, which until recently had been occupied by a Miss Agatha Trunchbull. The will also showed that her father's lifetime savings, which fortunately were still safely in the bank, had also been left to her. The solicitor's letter added that if Miss Honey would kindly call into the office as soon as possible, then the property and the money could be transferred into her name very rapidly. Miss Honey did just that, and within a couple of weeks she moved into the Red House, the very place in which she had been brought up and where luckily all the family furniture and pictures were still around. From then on, Matilda was a welcome visitor to the Red House every single evening after school, and a very close friendship began to develop between the teacher and the small child. Back at school, the great changes were also taking place. As soon as it became clear that Miss Trunchbull had completely disappeared from the scene, the excellent Mr. Trilby was appointed head teacher in her place, and very soon after that, Matilda was moved up into the top form, where Miss Plimsoll quickly discovered that this amazing child was every bit as bright as Miss Honey had said. One evening, a few weeks later, Matilda was having tea with Miss Honey in the kitchen of the Red House after school, as they always did, when Matilda said suddenly, "Something strange has happened to me, Miss Honey." "Tell me about it," Miss Honey said. "This morning," Matilda said, "just for fun, I tried to push something over with my eyes, and I couldn't do it. Nothing moved. I didn't even feel the hotness building up behind my eyes. The power had gone. I think I've lost it completely." Miss Honey carefully buttered a slice of brown bread and put a little strawberry jam on it. I've been expecting something like this to happen, she said. You have? Why? Matilda asked. Well, Miss Honey said, it's only a guess, but this is what I think. But here's what I think. While you were in my class, you had nothing to do, nothing to make you struggle. Your fairly enormous brain was going crazy with frustration. It was bubbling and boiling away like mad inside your head. There was tremendous energy bottled up in there and nowhere to go. And somehow or other you were able to shoot the energy out through your eyes and make objects move. But now things are different. You are in the top form competing against children more than twice your age, and all that mental energy is being used up in class. Your brain is for the first time having to struggle and strive and keep really busy. Which is great. That's only a theory, mind you, and it may be a silly one, but I don't think it's far off the mark. I'm glad it's happened, Matilda said. I wouldn't want to go through life as a miracle worker. You've done enough, Miss Honey said. I can still hardly believe you made all this happen for me. Matilda, who was perched on a stool, stood at the kitchen table, ate her bread and jam slowly. She did so love these afternoons with Miss Honey. She felt completely comfortable in her presence, and the two of them talked to each other more or less as equals. Did you know, Matilda said suddenly, that the heart of a mouse beats at the rate of 650 times a minute? I did not, Miss Honey said, smiling. How absolutely fascinating. Where did you read that? In a book from the library, Matilda said. And that means it goes so fast you can't even hear the separate beats. It must sound like a buzz. It must, Miss Honey said. And how fast do you think a hedgehog's heart beats? Matilda asked. Tell me, Miss Honey said, smiling again. It's not as fast as a mouse, Matilda said. It's 300 times a minute. But even so, you wouldn't have thought it went as fast as that in the creature that moves so slowly, would you, Miss Honey? I certainly wouldn't, Miss Honey said. Tell me one more. A horse, Matilda said. That's really slow. It's only 40 times a minute. The child, Miss Honey told herself, seems to be interested in everything. When one is with her, it is almost impossible to be bored. I love it. The two of them stayed sitting and talking in the kitchen for an hour or so longer, and then at about 6 o'clock Matilda said good night and set out to walk home to her parents' house, which was about an 8-minute journey away. When she arrived at her own gate, she saw a large black Mercedes motor car parked outside. She didn't take too much notice of that. There were often strange cars parked outside her father's place, but when she entered the house, she was confronted by a scene of utter chaos. Her mother and father were both in the hall, frantically stuffing clothing and various objects into suitcases. What on earth's going on? She cried. What's happening, Daddy? We're off, Mr. Wormwood said, not looking up. We're leaving for the airport in half an hour, so you'd better get packed. Your brother's upstairs all ready to go. Get a move on, girl. Get going. Off, Matilda cried. Where to? Spain, the father said. It's a better climate than this lousy country. Spain, Matilda cried. I don't want to go to Spain. I love it here and I love my school. Just do as you're told and stop arguing, the father snapped. I've got enough troubles without messing about with you. But Daddy, Matilda began. Shut up, the father shouted. We're leaving in 30 minutes. I'm not missing the plane. But how long for, Daddy? Matilda cried. When are we coming back? We aren't, the father said. Now beat it, I'm busy. Matilda turned away from him and looked out through the open front door. As soon as she was on the... I can't read that. As soon as she was on the road, she began to run. She headed straight back towards Miss Honey's house, and she reached it in less than 4 minutes. She flew up the drive, and suddenly she saw Miss Honey in the front garden, standing in the middle of a bed of roses doing something with a pair of clippers. Miss Honey had heard the sound of Matilda's feet racing over the gravel, and now she straightened up and turned and stepped out of the rose bed as the child came running up. My, she said, what in the world is the matter? Matilda stood before her, panting out of breath. Her small face flushed crimson all over. They're leaving, she cried. They're all got they've all gone mad, and they're filling their suitcases, and they're leaving for Spain in about 30 minutes. Who is? Miss Honey asked quietly. Mummy and Daddy and my brother Mike, and they say I've got to go with them.